Welcome, Gunrunner.
This video is brought to you by a Compendium of Amstrad CPC Games, Volume 1 by Kieran Hawken and AG Books. This full-colour book features over 250 game reviews from the early days in 1984 right up to the homebrew games of today, as well as fun facts, interesting trivia, personal stories and developer interviews, making it the perfect companion to Alan Sugar's iconic 8-bit computer. It is available in both hardback and paperback and can be purchased worldwide from all leading bookstores, including Amazon, W.H. Smith's, Waterstones, World of Books, Barnes & Noble and Wordery. So what are you waiting for? Get your copy today! Over the years, there have been very few British entrepreneurs who have made such an impact as Sir Alan Sugar, hence the knighthood. Originally founded way back in 1968 as an importer of consumer electronics, it wasn't long before the company started creating its own unique products that regularly undercut its Japanese rivals while still maintaining a good level of quality and features. In 1984, Amstrad looked towards the booming home computer market and created the popular CPC range. Starting with the tape-based 464 and being followed by the disc-based 664 and 6128, these computers had two big selling points over their rivals. Firstly, had a built-in cassette recorder or disc drive, and secondly, they also came bundled with either a green screen or colour monitor, giving customers a great all-in-one package. Based on a Z80 CPU, the same as its biggest rival, the ZX Spectrum, the Amstrad CPC range soon took off with all the major European software houses supporting it. The computer proved particularly popular in France as well as Spain, as the vast games catalogue proves, and was also sold in parts of Europe under the Schneider brand. An enhanced range of CPC Plus machines were launched alongside a CPC-based games console called the GX4000 in 1990, but these failed to keep the brand alive, and it was officially discontinued less than a year later. Despite this, the CPC still retains a strong user base and an incredibly vibrant homebrew scene to this very day. However, one unfortunate aspect of the Amstrad CPC was that it received an awful lot of ports from the ZX Spectrum, partly due to its hardware similarities, but also because it was the worst selling of the so-called Holy Trinity of UK 8-bit computers, which discouraged developers from focusing on it solely. This means that it got relatively few exclusives compared to the Spectrum and Commodore 64, making a list like this surprisingly hard to compile. Although I should mention that as the most popular 8-bit micro in France, it did get a number of regional exclusives there, most of which I couldn't include here due to the language barrier. But that said, I did find more than enough games to make this video worthwhile, and I'm sure you'll find plenty of interest in what follows.
The Amstrad 464 is the 64K home computer with a monitor and data recorder included. From around $429, only our competitors aren't having fun.
It seems only right to start this video off with a Roland game. He was the Amstrad mascot after all, and this will be one of two such games on this list. Roland Ahoy is undoubtedly one of the lesser known games in the series, and there are two reasons for that. Firstly, because it wasn't just a lazy reskin of somebody else's game like Roland on the Ropes and Roland in the Caves, and secondly because this one wasn't given away free with the computer. Some people have described this game as an early version of Sid Meier's Pirates, and the two games certainly have some similarities. Roland, as you may have guessed, has now become a pirate and has to set sail to pillage the Golden Harbour, but before he can do this he must visit the Powder Quay to collect some cannonballs. Once you've got these, you can head to the Golden Harbour for that lovely loot and then make your escape. But like any good pirate, you need a place to hide your swag, and the nearby treasure cave seems like the ideal location, even if that name does seem like a little bit of a giveaway for anyone interested in stealing it. Once you've been to all three locations and completed the associated tasks, the game is complete. And this is the only problem with Roland Ahoy. It's far too short for any kind of long-term enjoyment. However, it is fun while it lasts, and it certainly has some very interesting ideas. A lot has been made of Ocean Software's brilliant isometric arcade adventure head over heels, not just because of its looks but more so its unique gameplay that requires you to constantly switch between the two characters in order to complete the game. But here we are with something very similar indeed, some 2 years earlier. So it turned out that John Rittman and Bernie Drummond's creation wasn't so original after all. I'm sure a lot of you will know that doppelganger is the German word for double, so that is what the title refers to. And in this game you take the roles of a sorceress and her identical twin, who appears to be a ghost. You are tasked with recovering gold ingots that have been stashed in a 25-room castle, which are all linked together by either green or blue doors. The green doors can only be accessed by the ghost, and the blue doors are exclusively for the sorceress. Once an ingot is found, it has to be returned to the starting room, but there are other objects such as keys and magic books that need to be used to progress. There are also enemies that have to be avoided at all costs. If all your energy, represented by an hourglass, is zapped, then it's game over. Some of these foes can be killed if you can figure out how, and that's half the fun here. The visuals in Doppelganger are certainly impressive, and you'll enjoy exploring everything there is on offer. When talking about hidden gems for the Amstrad CPC, in uranium we have one such candidate. Originating from Spain, it was actually given away free with the May 1986 edition of Load and Run magazine. In essence, this is a clone of Atari's popular Lunar Lander arcade game, but one with more than a few original ideas of its own. You have to pilot your lander through a series of perilous caves, picking up the valuable uranium and trying not to crash or run out of fuel. You pick up the valuable radioactive element by landing on squares marked with a U. These are often put in hard to reach places, so you need to guide your craft in very carefully by thrusting your rockets and constantly readjusting your position. As thrusting burns fuel, you'll also need to keep this topped up too by landing on one of the refueling pads, but these are much larger and easier to reach thankfully. Hitting the scenery or botching your landing will result in an instant death and the loss of one of your 5 lives. By moving off the bottom of the screen you can enter the next section of the cave. If you do this by mistake, then it is possible to fly back up. The graphics are fairly simple but suit the game perfectly, and although the audio is minimal, it does the job just fine. Overall, Uranium is a highly playable and rather enjoyable arcade style affair that will appeal greatly to fans of thrust type games. Cascade Games, creators of the infamous Cascade 50 cassette, a compilation of truly terrible games written in BASIC that they tried to shift by offering people a free digital watch. So with their reputation tarnished by that, you'd be rightly wary of any of their other productions. But I must say that Questa is a surprisingly original and quite enjoyable arcade adventure. In the game you play as an Aladdin type character flying a magic carpet through a multitude of danger packed screens on a quest to save his kingdom from an evil wizard. As you make your way through the screens you'll need to avoid all the evil minions and look out for any useful objects. The latter of these are very important as it's impossible to progress through some screens without holding the right item. You can hold up to 3 items at a time but this never becomes much of an issue, although some items in the game are totally useless. You have 3 lives and an energy bar for each one. Hitting an enemy drains this. However, if you grab the magic orb, you'll be able to eliminate enemies with your fire spell. graphics in Questa are nothing special, but do the job well enough. The same comments can be said for the audio really. It's safe to say that Questa is a pretty obscure game for the Amstrad CPC, but one that's worth looking out for, especially if you're a fan of these early flick screen adventures. Now you probably already know this by looking at the video in front of you, but Zap to Balls is actually a clone of the classic Mitchell Corp arcade game Pang. I'm sure you're already saying, but the Amstrad got a great port of Pang by Ocean, and yes, you'd be right, but that conversion was only compatible with the CPC Plus and GX4000 console, leaving it out the reach of regular CPC owners. A rather talented demo scene coder by the name of Elmar Krieger was a bit upset about this, and so decided to go and make his own version of the game aimed at regular CPC machines. Well, I say regular, because the game is actually 1 to 8K only, and came on disc rather than tape, so its audience was still somewhat limited. The game plays almost identically to Pang, with you using a harpoon to blast the bubble bouncing around the screen, so they split into two until nothing is left. This mechanic is somewhat like the Atari arcade game Asteroids. The major difference here is that there aren't any power-ups, and there are no hazards other than the bubbles themselves. The physics are also slightly different in the way the balls bounce and split, never changing trajectory. Zap to Balls is absolutely outstanding when it comes to both the graphics and sound, with gorgeous backdrops and a superb soundtrack throughout. Is it as good as Pang? No, definitely not, but it's a pretty good substitute that really shows what the CPC can do. Programmed by Paul Shirley, who is probably best known for the Amstrad CPC ports of Spin Dizzy and Splat, Quackerjack is a really quirky and enjoyable game. At first looks, you'd probably expect this to be a clone of the classic Universal arcade game Mr. Do, but once you start playing you'll find it's actually quite different, and more like another CPC classic that came out a few years after this, Laura Seal's Excellent Squeak. The idea is to guide your duck around the screen to collect 5 eggs, without getting killed. Only 1 egg appears at a time, and you'll need to plan your route towards it carefully. Not just because there are various hazards in your way such as moving enemies and ovens, roast duck anyone, but also because once you step on a tile, it disappears. So if you walk on too many tiles, you might find your way to the next egg blocked. Shiny treasures try to distract you from your path, but the best way to get each egg is by taking the shortest route possible. If you find yourself stuck, you have to kill yourself to reset the stage. Visually, the game is pretty simple, but it all works well enough, and a handy intro sequence shows you what to look out for as you play. The audio is also pretty basic too, but does the job intended. Although Quackerjack relies on luck at times just as much as skill, you'll find yourself getting quite addicted to the game, and it's definitely a real hidden gem for the system. The long-forgotten Artic Computing released quite a few games for the Amstrad CPC before disappearing the very year after this game was released, but they were nearly all ports of existing ZX Spectrum games, and I say very nearly because Obsidian is the one exception to that statement, being an Amstrad CPC exclusive. But that's not the most interesting thing about this game, because Obsidian was designed by none other than Tony Warriner, who went on to found Revolution Software, the company behind all-time classics like Broken Sword, Lure of the Temptress and Beneath the Steel Sky. In fact, he was still at school when he programmed this game, and ended up failing all of his exams because he was so obsessed with finishing it and pursuing a career in the video game industry. The game itself is a flick-screen arcade adventure set over 50 screens, where you're trying to repair a space station that's been sent haywire by the gravitational effects of a black hole. So you'll need to find the engines to restart them, collect and use objects, avoid hazards, and try to disable the rogue security droids so your crewmates can return safely. This is your typical pick up an item and find a way to use it type arcade adventure. Neither the graphics nor sound are anything to write home about, but the compulsive gameplay makes Obsidian a game worth looking up. When you think of mascot games, you usually imagine a platformer, and Roland in Time doesn't disappoint by being just that. The inspirations for this one are clear. The first of these was the hugely popular BBC TV show Doctor Who. In fact, the game even features a rendition of the famous theme tune from that very show, and also has an appearance in the iconic TARDIS itself. The second clear influence comes from legendary 8-bit platform game Jet Set Willy, as Roland in Time very much follows the same design, as you move from screen to screen collecting the shiny objects, avoiding the enemies and performing pixel perfect jumps. There are over 50 screens to get through, each with its own theme, and you're going to need plenty of patience to do it. The game's difficulty is hinted at from the very first screen in fact, when you realise that you have a seemingly generous 10 lives. But you're going to need them all here. In many ways this shouldn't be a game that deserves any recognition, given its total lack of originality and well-trodden tropes. But there's no doubting that the game has a certain charm, and in many ways it's a better game than the one that inspired it. The visuals are big, bold and colourful, the music is excellently implemented, and the gameplay is firm but fair. It's also worth noting that Roland in Time was followed by an equally adept sequel in Roland in Space. Another slick 3D isometric arcade adventure on a computer that seems to excel at this genre, Meltdown sees you trying to prevent a nuclear disaster by negotiating 3 floors of a dangerous power station. On each of these floors you can find 8 computer terminals. The first of these allows you to go back to the previous floor, the following 6 screens activate a mini game that you have to win to retrieve a password, and the final computer lets you enter these passwords to progress to the next level and complete your mission. The final challenge is a text-based computer program where you need to adjust the control rods of the reactor to stop it exploding. These mini-games play a lot like short arcade games, such as one that is clearly based on the classic Midway coin-op space app. This means that there is a great deal of gameplay variation for a game of this type, and it will take you a while to master all the different mini-games on offer. Meltdown is often compared to the CPC classic Get Dexter, with its bold, colourful graphics and similar gameplay style, but the aforementioned mini-games in digitised speech really help set it apart. In fact, I must focus on that last point for a moment, because the Dalek-like voices in the game really are superb and definitely help bring it to life. My only real complaint with Meltdown is that the gameplay is a little on the slow side, but you'll soon get used to it. When talking about cult games for the Amstrad CPC and outside of the Amsoft games, there are none that get mentioned more than Sci-Fi's Fantasy. The only reason it's not better known is because it came quite late in the CPC's life, so passed a lot of people by. Many folk have described the game as the Amstrad Shadow of the Beast, and it's not an unfair comparison in all honesty, not just because it has somewhat similar gameplay style, but also because it really pushed the computer to its technical limits, just as Psychnosis' game did on the Amiga. The game sees you travelling across the mystical land of Norum on a quest to rescue your girlfriend and defeat the evil wizard that took her captive. The game is set over 4 very distinct levels that all feature their own gameplay style. On the first one you move across the land defeating all the enemies. This is very reminiscent of Shadow of the Beast. The second stage is another side scroller, but this time you're on a horse and the focus is on collecting objects. The third level is a one-on-one fight that reminded me a great deal of Palace Software's classic Barbarian. The final section reverts to the same style as the first, only with a far greater challenge. Both the graphics and sound in Sci-Fi's Fantasy are jaw-droppingly gorgeous, and the gameplay is perfectly pitched. My only minor moan is that it plays a tad on the slow side.
Did I buy Amstrad 6128 computers?
Because it comes complete with built-in disk drive and green screen for only £299.
Or £399 with colour monitor, sir.
And?
Because of the Amstrad's powerful 128K memory and the impressive range of business software available, sir.
So what do you think you're doing on it?
180 miles an hour, sir.
The Amstrad 6128. Who says business and pleasure don't mix?
And that rounds up my look at 10 amazing exclusives for the Amstrad CPC. Can you think of any other exclusives for the iconic 8-bit home computer range that should have made the list? Or do you think some of these games were unworthy of inclusion? I'd love to hear the thoughts and views of my audience, so please get typing in that comments section. Before I go though, I must thank all of my loyal patrons for continuing to support my channel and make videos like this possible. However, I must give special thanks to the following patrons in particular for their much appreciated pledges: Mitchell Valentino, Neptune, Seth A. Robinson, Carl Olsen, Ozzy B, Noel Saw, Dos Gamerman and Electron Star Collapse. If you also want to help support all my creative endeavours, including this YouTube channel, then please go and check out my Patreon right now. You can get access for hosts for extra content, including downloads, exclusive videos, creative insights, and much more besides. I've been the Laird, I thank you for watching, and I'll see you all again for another video very soon.